Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome. Happy Friday. Justin Collery joined with Frank Prendergast. Welcome to the AI argument. Frank, how's your week been?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's been pretty good. I've the DeepSeek drama continues. So many different DeepSeek related news stories that have been catching my eye.
In
Uh,
every way, DeepSeek are the new OpenAI. So they are. Normally, this was the OpenAI hour, and now we've become the DeepSeek hour.
we were the
Uh,
OpenAI or half hour rather. Then we became the Google half hour, and now we're going to be the DeepSeek half hour. Yeah,
all right, I have a little thought experiment for you. Right, I wanted
go for it.
to bring this for you. Right? I've actually had a great week. I've had some great ideas. So here's a thought experiment for you. This is absolutely investment advice. You should base all of your investments on the little thought experiment we're about to do. So, as a result of the DeepSeek release last week, NVIDIA stocks crashed by nearly 20%, 17%. Okay. And so that got me thinking about, why was that and blah, blah. And people were talking about these paradoxes and whatever. So, as a starter, we're about 2 years away from AGI, right? That's my starting position, right? In 2 years, we will have AGI. And it's not unreasonable to expect in a world where AGI expects we'll all have ourselves, our physical selves, and then our AGI counterpart. So, how many GPUs do you think NVIDIA shipped in 2023?
Oh, good grief! I have absolutely no idea.
It was a tiny number. It was about 4 million, which actually was really small, right? I was surprised it was so small. Last year, how many GPUs did NVIDIA ship?
Again, not a clue.
10 times more, about 40 million, right?
Okay.
But 2 years from now,
Are you going to
we
ask me to
think,
do maths?
no, it's okay. Don't
Okay.
worry. You've done all the maths I'm
Okay.
going to ask you to do, right? I'm going to ask you just to think, right? If they are selling 40 million GPUs and that was their best year ever and they're worth a whole lot of money, cast your mind forward 2 years to when AGI comes about and how many people are on the planet? 8 billion. So if we were all to have our own companion AGI thing, I mean, feasibly, NVIDIA could have to sell 8 billion GPUs, one for every human on the planet. And last year, they only sold 40 million. So the idea that NVIDIA tanked in price because of the DeepSeek release, which brought AGI closer, is totally wrong. If anything, the NVIDIA shares should become more valuable as a result.
Which, I mean, to back up, I mean, I think you're making some interesting leaps here, which may not be incorrect, but I find it interesting that your vision of the future is that we all have our own personal AGI. I think that's a fascinating vision of the future. But also, just to back up what you're saying, what I find really interesting is that NVIDIA's stock tanked despite the fact that DeepSeek used their chips to train on, just not the most powerful chips or the most recent chips, which, I mean, so that's kind of fascinating in itself. I do think for those who maybe aren't quite tuned in to the Irish sarcastic sense of humor, we should maybe put a proper disclaimer on this and say this is not investment advice. Do not take Justin's initial statement seriously. I don't want some legal body coming after us here.
No, of course it isn't. I'm joking, but I am serious about that. It doesn't make any sense that the only thing I would
Yeah.
say is that they are doing deals with Huawei to allow Huawei chips to do the inference, and that would be certainly a threat to NVIDIA. But just the numbers are so different, right? That
Yeah.
40 million were shipped last year, and you could potentially have a demand for billions of them in the very near future, like not a far away. Makes me think that there's going to be a lot of GPUs shipped, and so companies that make GPUs are going to be very, very valuable. So there you go. That's Justin's not investment advice. Do not buy NVIDIA. Buy NVIDIA.
Um,
What else has been going on with DeepSeek this week?
Oh, endless amounts of stuff. So let's see. Let's start with they're already banned in one country. Interestingly, well, not surprisingly, it's a European country, maybe. It's Italy, who previously banned ChatGPT briefly
It is.
before they sorted out some some data shenanigans that were going on. I can't even remember the exact details, but I do remember that they were without ChatGPT for a short period. So they have banned DeepSeek, and the Irish, I always forget the DPC, the Irish Data Protection Commission, I always forget what it stands for. They have also contacted DeepSeek to ask, hey, what are you doing with our data? And they pointed out that, you know, if your data is stored in Ireland or in the EU, there are strong safeguards in place as to how that data will be used. If data is stored in China, those safeguards will not exist. And they pointed out as well that the Chinese Communist Party can use its national security law to access the data, which is all true. And it's something that I have seen a lot of American commentators being extremely concerned about as well. I've also noticed that there's a little bit of confusion because DeepSeek is an open source model. And so I have seen people thinking that because it's open source, then it's safe for them to use, but then they're using it on deepseek.com. So just to be like absolutely clear for anyone who kind of isn't aware of how all this stuff works, deepseek.com is like the hosted version of DeepSeek. If you put stuff into the prompts on deepseek.com, that gets stored on a Chinese server somewhere. And yes, the Chinese government could potentially access that data. That's the way the law works over there.
Frank, you're presumably delighted with this development that DeepSeek has been banned and possibly will be banned in Ireland too.
Well, so before we get to that, let's just clarify about the open source thing. So the open source thing means that you can actually run it on your own server, and then you could run it on, you know, you could run one of the DeepSeek small models on your laptop, and then the data doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go to the CCP. It doesn't go to China. It's just on your laptop.
And I would add, actually, it's also on Azure. So you can run it on Azure, the big model, I think, as well. And I think it's also on SageMaker. It's on AWS. The Azure one was interesting because on Monday, Microsoft were giving out about DeepSeek stealing data. And on Tuesday, they decided to host the same model on their infrastructure and give it away almost for free. So that was kind of entertaining. But we'll come back to that. You presumably are delighted that the European Union is protecting your precious data and not letting the Chinese Communist Party steal it from you.
Well, yes, I am actually. I am. I think it's important to look at how our data is used and what it's used for, and yes, absolutely. I think it's and I think it's crucial for people to realize as well. I mean, you know, for most things that I'm going to be prompting, I don't really care if the CCP have access to it. But if I was a corporation or a company or an organization, I would not want to be putting proprietary data into the DeepSeek model without any real clear indications of like what that data might or might not be accessed for or used for.
All right, that's really important. Okay, so for the rest of this discussion, you're 100% correct, right? So a bit like the disclaimer at the top of the show, which wasn't right. We're talking about personal data here. I 100% agree with you when it comes to corporate data, right? Corporate data is different, right? You would never touch that model with corporate data. But personal data, I mean, I think I would love to see Silvio Berlusconi's chats with ChatGPT. I think that'd be hilarious. I think that if he was still alive, the poor fella. But anyway, I think it. I mean, are you laboring under the impression that the Americans don't look at your data that goes to OpenAI?
Absolutely not. No, and I mean, from the personal use perspective, for most prompts that are, you know, harmless or that are just related to marketing content or whatever, I don't see really any difference. And I'd almost, I mean, I would have the same level of apprehension of sharing any kind of data like that with, say, Mark Zuckerberg's hosted models as I would with DeepSeek.
I'll be honest with you, right? A lot of the hysteria around this, to me, it's tantamount to racism almost in my mind. It's kind of like, well, if somebody's going to steal my data, I want them to look like me. I want them to be white, middle-aged, and gray. And I don't want any of those other people stealing my data. I just want people like me stealing my data. And, you know, it's a bit like, why do you think that MSG is bad for you, right? Monosodium glutamate. It's not bad for you at all, right? It was just put out in World War II that MSG was bad for you because it was made by Japanese people. And they wanted to paint Japanese people as being, you know, not quite as trustworthy as Americans. And this is the same thing. That's true, yeah.
I'm going to have to I'm going to have to verify this for sure, because there's MSG and one of my favorite brands of dry roasted peanuts, and Marcy has said that they're probably not a good idea to eat, and I must check that now and be like, MSG is good for you. What are you talking about?
No, MSG is totally fine. Go for it. They made it from seaweed originally. So this is, and so a lot of this is just, fear of the other person, right? That's what it strikes me. A lot of it, like, no corporate is going to, allow, no reasonable corporate is going to allow people to type their information into any model. Let's do the Chinese one, but not any model, indeed.
I wonder, are you underestimating or overestimating the level of understanding that people have about these things, though? I mean, I think it's entirely possible. We saw, we've discussed on the show before this whole thing of like bring your own AI, where people are using AI tools without without management knowing or without the companies knowing.
That's true.
And so if somebody is bringing their own AI and the one that they choose to bring is DeepSeek.com, I think maybe we're in this filter bubble where we really think that people kind of understand a lot more about how these things work than they do.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally valid fear, right? So if you were working in a corporate and you were putting corporate secrets into DeepSeek, yes, you are giving your secrets away to not just the Chinese Communist Party, but your competitors more than likely as well, because that's who's going to get that data in the end of. So that's totally valid. But there was a response from Dario Amodi, who is the CEO of Anthropic. And his response to this struck me as being quite self-serving. So what he was saying was that, look, we can't allow the Chinese. He makes a couple of very good points, by the way. And it's very interesting to me that now is when this becomes really important, because we're so close to AGI. So he was saying that it's more important now than ever to impose export controls on NVIDIA chips. And the reason that it's more important than ever is we are getting to the point where the models are getting smart enough to improve themselves. And so you can think of it almost like an elastic band, right? The closer we get to AGI, the more the model can help you make AGI. And once you get to AGI, obviously it's very good at creating something that's even more intelligent than the average human. And so in theory, the person that gets there first will always have an advantage, because they're always using the best technology to make their model better. And therefore it's self-improving. And so he's saying the next 2 years are super, super important to make sure that we get to AGI before the Chinese do, because we can't let that happen. And so we need export controls. And I'm like, yes, I kind of agree with you, right? There's logical aspects to the argument, but it's also self-serving to a certain extent, because all you're asking the government to do is to hobble your competition. And I would sort of say, well, look at Dario, the best way to combat this is to ship more product faster, which is going to annoy Frank. But for me, it's pretty good. So that was kind of interesting. What else is going on with DeepSeek?
Well, a minute ago, you were saying you'd love to see, the Italian government's chats with DeepSeek, for example. And as it turns out, there was a moment in time there where apparently you could have, because somebody discovered that DeepSeek had left some of their databases completely wide open, and they were able to query the databases and get back absolutely everything, including people's chats. There was like a million a million prompts and back and forth in the database that were completely open and accessible.
I found this very interesting, this particular story. I saw the screenshots and I saw what they had done. And yes, they left their database wide open. And it was just an interesting lesson from a technical perspective. These people are brilliant at what they do, right? They're fantastic mathematicians. They wrote beautiful code, and they forgot to put a password on their database and hide it from the internet. So you can get these people who probably each have an IQ of, more than 170 each. These are, 200 the smartest people on the planet, and even they make mistakes. And so that's a lesson to us all. Also, a good reason to use AI to do these things, because AI won't make the same mistakes as humans do, even really smart ones. But yeah, fascinating story, and yet another example as to why you wouldn't put corporate secrets through any AI. You want to keep that stuff internal.
Very true. Yeah, very true. And then there was another story, which is some quarters of the internet, particularly the creatives, are finding this absolutely hilarious, that OpenAI are basically, it's what you talked about last week. You talked about distilling the models and how DeepSeek more than likely used OpenAI and distilled one of their models in order to get where they got to. And now OpenAI have been tweeting that they're not all that happy about it. And there's been a couple of there's been a lot of news stories about how I don't know how upset OpenAI are about it, but they believe that DeepSeek used their model to distill, in other words, like it's the method you described last week, where they basically suck out loads of output from the model and use that to develop their new model. Loads of news stories saying OpenAI are upset about it, and then loads of creatives falling around the floor laughing, crying with laughter at the irony that OpenAI would be annoyed that somebody stole their material in order to build a model.
I presume, Frank, you're on the side of OpenAI here, and you don't condone what DeepSeek did at all.
I find the irony interesting. I think that, however, I think there is a distinction. So I think, we're still in that gray area of, we haven't had any legal rulings about whether you can use copyrighted material to train the models on. We're still waiting on the rulings on all those kind of like high profile cases. However, the terms of service of OpenAI are very clear that you cannot use it for distillation purposes. So, they broke the terms of service. That's kind of clear. Whereas it's still actually unclear as to whether copyrighted materials can be lashed into the training data. So I do think there's a distinction there, but I get the irony, and it's certainly, from an optics perspective, it seems a bit rich that they would be boo-hooing about this.
Look, I think it's hilarious. By the way, there's a discussion as well going online as to whether they took the outputs the way that you described, or whether there's just so much OpenAI material on the web now that that's just polluting the data set, and that's actually what's happened.
OpenAI claimed they had proof that distillation had occurred, but they did not share that proof or go into details of what that proof might be. But apparently they had previously shut off the API to any known DeepSeek IPs, etc., because they could see that it was going on. But they didn't then go into detail about how they did it if they had blocked them.
So this brings us to what I think is the subject of the week, outside of DeepSeek, but related, which is copyright. And I've had a brilliant idea, and I want to get your read on this idea, right?
Okay.
So again, I'm going to, just to set it up, right? We're maybe 2 years out from AGI, and this is a very important economic point in time, but also a really important cultural point in time. And so you can see that's why the Americans are very upset that the Chinese model did really, really well, right? Because they want to be number one in this new world. And the Chinese are trying really, really hard to be number one, right? And obviously, the American models will reflect an American view of the world. And as we've seen, the Chinese models reflect Chinese. So if you ask about Tiananmen Square or Taiwan, you'll get Chinese answers. And I think that this is really important from a European context, because we need to have models, because this is going to be the technology of the next 100 years. And we will be culturally disappear in the ether unless we have models which are just as good, right, as the American models and the Chinese models. And so we need to create an environment. At the moment, all of the regulation in Europe has been stick, right? You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. So we need to give a carrot to encourage lots of AI companies to set up in Europe and create really good AI models that reflect European values. So here's my idea. What we do is we set up an AI copyright council for Europe. And we do a deal with the AI companies. And we say, when you create a model, what you will do is you will give this council a copy of your training data, all of it, everything that you made to train that data. And what we will do then is we will charge you a fee, right? A license fee. And we will look at all the copyrighted material and we will spread that fee out to all of the copyright owners so they get reimbursed. In return, we will give you complete immunity from any court case for using copyrighted material. So you can use as much copyrighted material. It will be entirely legal, but you will show us what copyrighted material you've used, and we will then charge a license fee and send that out to the copyright holders. So you've created what they're trying to do, regulatory certainty. You've created an environment where I can go and I can create all these AI models and I know I'm not going to get sued. What do you think?
I think it's above my pay grade. I think it's a very I think it's a really interesting idea, but given that I don't even understand fully the current law, but I think this is the issue, that you're highlighting, is that even the AI companies don't understand the current law because nobody understands the current law.
Yeah.
And so I certainly think that whatever about the specific mechanics, I certainly think that you're onto something in terms of Europe having a carrot, and B, having some kind of regulatory certainty around, yes, you will be fine to develop a powerful model here in the EU. So yeah, I mean, in broad terms, I like it. I like it a lot. And it's interesting because it does, we after one of the episodes recently, we ended up continuing chatting, and we kind of realized that, like, we don't disagree as much on regulation as we maybe thought we did, but what we do agree on is it would be, I think you probably have a stronger opinion than I do, but I certainly believe that it would be great if there was more AI development, more AI companies going on in the EU than there is currently. We have a couple of companies. We have a couple of really, we have. I think it's Mistral, isn't it? Because Mistral is
French company.
Mistral is the model, and Mistral is the company, confusingly.
Yeah.
And then we also, I actually hadn't copped until recently that the Flux image generator is that's actually from a German company as well. So we do have, we have a couple of interesting companies, but we need more, and we need more going on in the space. So yeah, I totally agree with you that figuring out what those carrots would be will be vital, absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of other things going on this week. So one of the companies that's made a lot of noise is a company called Devin, who've made so this is kind of, you're always looking at it from the creative's point of view, and I'm always looking at it from the techie's point of view, right? And the number that I keep quoting to people is 03, which we're supposed to get this afternoon, by the way, possibly by the time we're finished the show. 03, when you run that against a set of software engineering problems, real life bugs, it solves nearly 80% of them. And to me, I mean, that's kind of game over almost for developers there's a whole load of inertia, right? Adoption timelines and all that sort of stuff. But if you can get a model and throw it at a code base and it can fix, 4/5 of the bugs, I mean, God, it's kind of game over, right? For developers in that type, right? Anyway, we're not going to get into that argument now. But Devin, who have a software product that promises to do this, has been getting a lot of bad press because it doesn't work very well. In fact, it works terribly, and it does. I will tell you a funny story, actually. Will I tell you a funny story? Devin,
please do.
Devin is Ziggy's dog. So Ziggy was a friend of mine who worked in a large American bank, and I won't say which one. And I was asking him what it was like. He said, "Look, Justin, I'll be honest with you. My dog will be more productive than most people that work at this company." And I go, "All right, go on, explain." It says, "Well, if my dog worked at this company, the dog would come in the morning, eat some food, have a drink, go to sleep for an hour or two, then he'd get up, probably go have a poo, bit of a walk, come back, sleep for another hour or two, and then he'd go home. And, he wouldn't have done anything, but at least he wouldn't have caused any work for anybody else, therefore making him more productive than 50% of the people that worked at the company." That's very good. And Devin is less productive than Ziggy's dog. Devin creates more work than it actually saves, which is interesting, but we will get there. It's just not quite there yet.
What I thought was interesting about the Devin story as well was something that we come back to time and time again here, which is that it makes mistakes, that AI makes mistakes completely differently to how humans make mistakes. And so what they discovered, I'm just trying to find the quote here about how they said that it was really concerning that they couldn't predict which tasks it would succeed at. So they would give it a task, they would give it a simple task, and it would do really well. But then they would come back and they'd give it a similar task, and it would completely fail, even though it had proven that it could do that kind of task previously. And that's the kind of thing that we've been talking about before on this show, about how hallucinations and the unreliability of LLMs is just very different to the mistakes humans make. And I find that kind of fascinating, especially since you're talking about AGI in less than 2 years.
2 years. Christmas, 12 months.
But I'm kind of thinking about that, and I'm like, well, it depends on how we define AGI. And I'm concerned about the fact that the AGI is being built on this technology that makes these mistakes totally differently to how humans make them. And so, yes, it might be technically better at most tasks than any human, but also it's going to get things completely, wildly, and utterly unpredictably wrong.
Yes. And I think, okay, you're correct. So the term they use is that it'll be jagged. So it'll be better than most humans. And in some respects, it'll be way better than most humans. But in other respects, maybe not so much. It'll just be, it's AGI. So it's as good as the average human.
Yeah,
so if you think the average human.
But the jagged is different, I think, because the jagged means like there are, to me, the jagged frontier means that there are domains that it's really good in, and then there are domains that for some reason it's just terrible in. But what I think is more concerning is that there are domains that it's really good in, but equally it'll completely fail at the thing it's really good at, just randomly and unpredictably.
I would say, right, we can come back to this in a couple of weeks when you had a play with O3. Because I think the thinking models are the thing that will solve an awful lot of those issues. So again, come back to our favorite model, DeepSeek. If you look at the chain of thought that comes out, it sort of goes down. Actually, the interesting paper, I'll come back to this, but it goes through and sort of thinks about things. And if it makes a mistake, kind of like you've described, it goes, oh, no, that's not right. And it's talking to itself saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done something else instead. And it sort of it self-corrects as it goes. So I think this methodology, the thinking methodology, will solve it. And interestingly, again, using the open source models, there was a paper published this week. This is why it's so powerful, right? Where they studied this idea that the thinking models, they try a different paths, right? And they're trying to solve, let's say, a maths program or a programming problem. And so these researchers analyzed each of the different paths that it went through down. And in particular, for the ones where it failed to solve the problem. And what it discovered was that more often than not, it actually did start out on the right path, but gave up too easily. And therefore then wasn't able to solve the problem. But it's measurable, right? So you can fix it. And that's why these things are going to get so much better so quickly. Because all of these problems that it can't solve right now, people are studying why they're not solving them. And they can see the chain of thought. And they'll just turn those dials and they'll let it think longer on certain types of problems, and it will be able to solve them. So, 2 years, and it'll get another interesting thing I find is that the bad press that Devin is getting is going to make everybody think, oh yeah, sure, that's it now. This thing can't do software. Didn't they try it with Devin and that was no good at all? And then 12 months from now, they're all going to be totally shocked when it's way better at writing software than everybody else.
Sure,
Absolutely, it's going to happen.
I don't quite share your level of confidence, but as you say, let's see what happens when O3 becomes a reality and people really start to test it out and to put it through its paces. So there's a few. We didn't talk about the authors, did we?
Oh, what a waste of time! Yeah, go on, tell me about the authors.
Well, there's two interesting stories around authors. One was a friend of mine, Pepper Brooks sent me a link to a new human authored certification. So you can now go through a certification process and have your book stamped as certified as human authored. So that was the first piece of author news. And the second piece of author news was an author who apparently wrote the books that where's it gone? I just thought it was funny because they were Agent Pendergast. So
Yes.
not Prendergast. So, but Agent Pendergast.
Yes.
So apparently he's written this series of books. He's very concerned about the whole copyrighted materials in the training data issue.
Yeah.
So he has started an organization. They've got seed funding, and the idea is that all these authors would group together, slightly reminiscent of what you were talking about at a much, much bigger level, but that they would license their books basically to the AI companies for their training data, but that they would be insisting that any new model that was being trained, they would have to pay the license fee again. So there would be recurring revenue for the authors involved. You say it was a waste of time?
Yeah. Also, I was interested. Did you see they raised 13 million? Did you see who they raised the 13 million from? Themselves. No. Themselves. They put up the money themselves, which, I mean, in one respect, it's brilliant. It means they believe in it. But they were touting how they'd raised all this money. But if you give yourself the money, you haven't really raised the money.
Right.
Just gone like that. Pass it from one hand into the other. And I do worry that this is a bit self-serving, because my vision of this is that the rights holders aren't going to be terribly happy with my suggestion, because it'll be pennies. Like, it won't be a large amount of money, because you're doing this for cultural reasons, right? Yeah. And the economic value that you're creating isn't out of the, isn't out of this. It's out of something completely different. So,
but you do have to. I mean, you have to admire the approach, I think, because we are seeing lots of licensing deals going on, and so. Mm-hmm. If you're an author, and if you can put together enough of if you can band together enough authors to put together a corpus of data that is actually valuable, it seems like a good shot to me.
I have another thought experiment for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say I'm a big AI company, and I take all of your beautiful copyrighted material, and I ingest the entirety of it into my model to create a brilliant, very capable model. I then get that model to spew out the same amount of material, none of which is the same as your copyrighted material, which I stole from you, right? So it's equally high quality data, but none of it's copyrighted. And then I use that uncopyrighted data to make another model, and then that's the one that I sell. I mean, technically I could do that, and I just got around all of your copyrights. And there you go. Is that okay? You okay with that?
Well, I mean, I think there's question marks over, is it actually possible? Because I know it's being attempted, and I know there's a lot of synthetic data in new models, and we even talked earlier about the distillation process. However, I think if it was like the answer, then we wouldn't be seeing all these like multi-million-dollar licensing deals going on between the companies and the big publishing houses and the big news organizations, etc. I think I have to assume from those deals that they're still finding that they need uniquely fresh and uniquely human authored materials.
Yeah, interesting. We'll see where it goes. Frank, it's been we're up on time. It's been do you remember all those months ago when I said I was going to hold my breath until there was a new release?
Yes.
I'm positively hyperventilating these days. There's releases a go. O3 is coming out. Google are about to release Gemini Pro. Who knows what the Chinese are going to release this week? It's that the speed of this development is definitely going to increase just because of the competition, and it's great.
It is, although the constant scrabble to like test all these models and have fun with them and play with them, it's pretty time consuming.
It is. Frank, great conversation as always. Really enjoyed it.
Talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Take it easy.